The sunlight slipped through my kitchen window, landing on the bouquet my son brought me that Mother's Day morning. David stood there, handsome, confident, his suit still crisp from work, yet there was something distant in his eyes. "Mom," he said, smiling faintly, "Clara's been sending you the $5,000 every month, right? I just want to be sure you're comfortable." My heart stilled. 5,000. I felt my stomach tighten. For 8 long months, I'd been living off donated canned goods from the church and neighborly kindness. I tried to steady my voice. "The church has been helping me, son." David's smile faltered, confusion washing over his face. And then she walked in, Clara, wearing a silk dress the color of moonlight, perfume thick enough to drown the scent of the apple pie I'd baked. Her beauty was flawless, but her eyes were colder than any winter night. "Oh, Mother," she said sweetly, "I've been bringing you the money myself each month. You must have forgotten." Forgotten? My hands clenched the corner of my apron. I knew every visit, every envelope, every dollar that had never reached me. But I stayed quiet. Some truths ripen slowly. David looked between us, lost. "Clara, you've been giving Mom the money, right?" Her lips curved again. "Of course, dear. Maybe she's just confused. Memory fades with age." The word struck deeper than I let show. I'd been called forgetful ever since my husband passed, by people who saw gray hair and assumed weakness. But I remembered everything, and I knew a lie when I heard one. "Perhaps it's just a mix-up," David murmured. "I'll check the accounts." He placed a warm hand on my shoulder, and I smiled faintly, though something inside me had already hardened. After they left, I sat alone at the wooden table, sunlight pooling around the empty teacups. 8 months. $40,000. Money that could have fixed the roof, repaired my broken fridge, or simply let me live in peace. That night I opened my old notebook, the one where I once wrote grocery lists, and wrote 2 new lines. "Find the truth. Don't trust polished lies." The ink bled slightly on the page as if sealing a vow, because deep down I knew this wasn't about money. It was about respect, the kind of respect that a mother deserves, even when her hands are wrinkled and her voice trembles. And I was done letting silence protect the guilty. Rehook. But sometimes the first step toward truth is also the one that breaks the family apart. Would you still take it? The next morning, the Texas air was already heavy with heat, the kind that makes even silence feel thick. I brewed my tea, staring at the fading steam as if it might spell the truth. My notebook sat open beside me, 2 lines underlined in shaky ink. Find the truth. Don't trust polished lies. That was the day I decided to stop waiting. I dressed neatly, the way I used to when I worked as the treasurer for St. Mary's Women's Committee, and walked to First Texas Community Bank. The teller was a kind young woman named Molly, her hair tucked into a bun, her smile soft and practiced. "Can you check if there have been any transfers from David Hayes?" I asked, steadying my voice. "He says he's been sending me $5,000 every month." Molly typed something into her computer, her smile fading. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes. There's no record of that. Only a $1.35 interest payment back in February." I nodded, thanked her, and stepped outside. The sun felt harsher now, the wind sharp against my cheeks. No transfers. No mail. Nothing. For 8 months I'd been thanking God for canned soup and church deliveries while someone else, someone close, was enjoying my comfort. That evening I sat at my kitchen table and opened an old ledger I hadn't used in years. My handwriting, steady, exact, filled every page. Utilities $24. Medicine $12. Donations $10. Every cent accounted for. No mention of David. No missing memory. Just truth clear as numbers. The next Sunday I went to church as usual. Reverend Cole found me sitting alone after service. "You look troubled, Margaret," he said gently. "I'm just trying to understand why my son's letters never arrived," I whispered. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "The Lord has a way of bringing the truth to light. Don't lose faith." Faith. I wanted to believe that. But faith alone wouldn't bring my stolen money, or my dignity, back. That night, under the amber glow of my kitchen lamp, I wrote again in my notebook. "If they're lying, make them tell the truth through the law." The words looked almost foreign on the page, but I meant every one of them. From that moment I began keeping record. Every call, every visit, every sweet lie Clara told. And I promised myself the next time she smiled at me, I'd be ready to smile back with proof. Rehook. When you start chasing the truth, you never know whose mask will fall first. And I had a feeling Clara's would crack soon. By late August, I had filled half my notebook with notes, times, dates, and Clara's every word. She came often, always dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Silk scarves, glossy heels, that heavy perfume that lingered long after she left. Every visit was the same. A bright smile, small talk, a meaningless gift, and not a single envelope. One afternoon, I was watering the lavender when her white Mercedes rolled up the driveway. She stepped out, holding a bouquet of lavender wrapped in gold paper. "Mother, I brought you these," she said, voice dripping with sugar. "They'll help you relax. Stress isn't good for your memory." I wiped my hands on my apron and looked her in the eye. "My memory's just fine, Clara. Fine enough to remember that the last time you brought me money was never." Her smile froze just for a breath. Then she laughed, that brittle sound I'd come to recognize. "Oh, you must be mistaken. I've been sending it. Maybe your bank's behind on processing." "Maybe," I said evenly. "But I already asked them. They said nothing's come through. 8 months." Silence. Even the cicadas outside seemed to stop their song. Clara fidgeted with her necklace, eyes darting toward her car. "I'll double-check with the bank," she said quickly, and in less than a minute she was gone, leaving behind the scent of fear disguised as perfume. That night I wrote in my notebook, August 22nd, Clara lied again. Nervous. Left early. Each entry felt like a brick in a wall I was building. One that would keep the truth safe. A week later, I received a call from a woman named Sandra Miller, the head accountant at David's company. I'd phoned pretending to ask about family transfers. "Mrs. Hayes," Sandra said carefully, "I can't give details, but yes, I've seen monthly transfers of $5,000 to an account under your name. The strange part is, the account number doesn't match yours." My heart thudded once, then went still. "So, someone opened another account under my name?" "I can't confirm that officially," Sandra said softly, "but it appears so." When the call ended, I sat in silence, the phone still warm in my hand. It all made sense now, the fake concern, the expensive car, the perfume that smelled like deceit. Clara hadn't just lied. She had stolen from me using my own name. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't a helpless old widow anymore. I was an accountant again. And it was time to audit every lie she'd ever told. Rehook. But to expose a liar, you sometimes have to set the perfect trap. And mine would begin with dinner. 3 days after that call, I picked up my phone and dialed David. "Son," I said, keeping my tone light, "why don't you and Clara come over for dinner this Sunday? It's been far too long." He sounded cheerful, unaware that every word I spoke was part of a plan. "That sounds great, Mom. Clara will be thrilled." I smiled faintly. She won't be. That Sunday, the house smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and apples. David's favorite since childhood. I laid out the table with my husband's old silverware and a few candles, making everything look as warm and harmless as possible. But under that soft light, a quiet storm was waiting. When their car pulled into the driveway, I saw the shimmer of Clara's jade silk dress before I heard her heels. She entered with her usual grace, perfume first, smile second. David followed with lilies in his hands and warmth in his eyes. "Mom, you look wonderful," he said, kissing my cheek. "I feel wonderful," I answered. "Especially knowing how generous you've been." Clara laughed, a touch too loud. "Oh, Mother, please, no need for thanks. It's our duty to take care of you." I poured the wine, spoke of neighbors and church events, let her grow comfortable, like a spider's prey walking willingly into silk. Then halfway through dinner, I leaned back in my chair. "I really appreciate this month's $5,000, I said casually. "It's already helping with the new heater." Clara smiled. "Of course, Mother. I always make sure to send it on the 10th of every month." "The 10th? David blinked. "No, honey. I set the transfers for the 15th. Always the 15th. Silence. You could hear the clock ticking, the knife clink against the plate, and the faint sound of her mask cracking. Clara's smile twitched, then steadied. "Oh, right, the 15th. I must have misspoken." I gave a small, knowing nod. "That's all right. I'll check with the bank on the 15th just to be sure. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. The wine caught the candlelight, trembling red. I saw fear flicker in her eyes before she looked away. That night, after they left, I sat at my desk and wrote, September 10th, Clara lied again. Claimed the 10th, David said 15th. Contradiction confirmed. Trap successful. Then I opened my laptop and sent a quiet email to two people. Bennett, David's senior accountant, and Amelia Rowe, my old college friend turned financial lawyer. Subject: it's time. She's exposed herself. Begin the review. I clicked send and smiled. Rehook. Sometimes you don't need to fight a liar. You just need to let them speak long enough to destroy themselves. And Clara had already started. The 15th came bright and windless, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. At 8 sharp, a thick envelope arrived from Bennett Confidential, Hayes Financial Records. Inside were pages of proof, 8 transfers of $5,000, all marked recipient, Clara Hayes. Below that, more charges: spa treatments, jewelry, airline tickets, and a Lexus lease. $47,800. The price of deceit. I stared at the papers until the numbers blurred. Each receipt was a scar but also a weapon. My trembling hand reached for my notebook and I wrote slowly, September 15th, evidence complete. The money, the car, the lies. Justice begins. That same day Amelia called. Margaret, she said firmly, this isn't just theft. It's elder financial exploitation. We can go to court. But I wasn't ready for court, not yet. I want David to see it first, I said. He needs to face the truth with his own eyes. So, a week later, I invited them again, David and Clara, under the pretense of a church charity dinner. Reverend Cole arrived too, carrying a beige envelope marked donation records. Only I knew what was really inside. When we all sat down, I slid the papers across the table. Son, I said softly, these are the donations you've been sending me. David frowned, confused. He read the first page. Then the next. Recipient: Clara Hayes. His eyes widened. Clara, what is this? Her smile cracked like glass. It's a mistake, she stammered. The bank must have mixed up the names. Then how do you explain the spa bills? The new car? I asked calmly. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a firm voice came from the doorway. You don't, said Bennett, stepping inside, a folder in his hand. Mrs. Hayes, your mother-in-law, didn't imagine this. I verified everything. David turned pale. You forged my mother's account? Clara's voice trembled. I was going to pay it back, No, I said softly. You didn't borrow. You stole. Her tears fell, but they carried no weight. David's hands shook as he whispered, Mom, I'm so sorry. That moment hurt more than any lie, because to find justice, I had to break my son's world. A week later, in a quiet courtroom, the truth was sealed in ink and law. Clara was ordered to repay every cent and stripped of access to David's accounts. When the gavel fell, I didn't feel triumph, only peace. Months later, the restitution arrived, and with it, a new purpose. I started a small charity, the Grace Hands Foundation, to help elders who'd been deceived by their families. Sometimes, pain plants the seed of healing. That winter, David knocked on my door under the falling rain. His eyes red, his voice trembling. Mom, I'm sorry. And for the first time in a long while I smiled, not because I'd won, but because the truth had finally come home. Rehook, final, because in the end, justice isn't about revenge. It's about finding peace strong enough to forgive, but wise enough never to forget. The months after the trial felt both long and strangely still. My house, once echoing with tense phone calls and restless nights, now carried only the sounds of wind brushing against the curtains and birds nesting in the oak tree out front. Peace, I learned, doesn't return in a rush. It drifts in slowly like dawn. The $40,000 restitution arrived by wire one soft morning in June. The screen blinked deposit completed, and I stared at the number, waiting for joy to rise. It didn't. Money could patch walls and fix a roof, but it couldn't mend the silence that followed betrayal. Instead of keeping it all, I used a small portion to repair the house and buy a new heater for winter. The rest I gave to Reverend Cole and Amelia to establish a small outreach under the Church Grace Hands Foundation, a safe space for seniors who'd been deceived by their own kin. Within weeks, the basement of St. Mary's filled with stories that sounded heartbreakingly familiar. A daughter who emptied her mother's pension, a grandson who forged his grandfather's checks. Each person arrived heavy with shame, but left a little lighter knowing someone believed them. I greeted every one of them the same way, with warm tea, a quiet chair, and the truth that saved me. You are not foolish for trusting. They were wrong for breaking it. David started volunteering on Saturdays, helping Amelia sort paperwork and updating spreadsheets like he was balancing his own soul. Watching him there, sleeves rolled up, brows furrowed, I saw a man rebuilding himself one act of kindness at a time. The guilt in his eyes softened a little each week, replaced by purpose. One evening he brought me a simple lavender plant in a clay pot. "For your porch," he said, "to remind us both that some things grow back stronger." I smiled, running my fingers across the leaves. Lavender always survives the frost, son. It just waits for sunlight. That night, as rain tapped gently on the windows, I lit a small candle beside my husband's photo. The flame wavered, golden and steady. I whispered, "Frank, it's done. The truth has come home." Outside, the lavender swayed in the rain, bending, never breaking. Inside, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Some say justice ends in a courtroom. I think it begins in forgiveness, not for those who wronged us but for ourselves, for daring to love even after being betrayed. Rehook epilogue: if you had lost everything, your trust, your peace, your name, but found yourself stronger in the end, would you still call it loss? Or would you call it rebirth? Autumn crept quietly over Texas that year. Mornings were cool enough for sweaters, and the smell of cinnamon drifted from the bakery down the road. At the Grace Hands Foundation, the sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, scattering soft color across our small desks. David was in the corner, talking gently with a widower who'd lost his savings to a relative. His voice was patient, calm, no trace of the man who once measured worth in dollars. Watching him, I realized healing isn't loud, it's steady. When I returned home that evening, the mailbox held a single white envelope addressed in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a folded letter, no return address, just the faint scent of perfume that stirred something old and complicated. "Mrs. Hayes, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know I am sorry. I live far from everything now, working at a small cafe. I think of what I did every day. I ruined the only people who ever showed me kindness." Clara, my fingers trembled slightly as I read it. There was no plea for sympathy, no excuses, only remorse written in uneven lines. For a moment I saw her as she had once been, smiling beside David at their wedding, eyes bright with a hope she later traded for greed. I placed the letter on the table, next to my notebook of truth. Then I lit a candle, letting the flame breathe beside the paper. "I forgive you, Clara," I whispered. Not because she deserved it, but because carrying anger any longer would dim the light I'd fought so hard to keep alive. That night, the house felt warm again. The ticking clock, the hum of the old refrigerator, even the creak of the floorboards, all sounded like old friends returning. Weeks later, I took the letter to St. Mary's and placed it in the foundation's memory box, where every client left a note of release. Words to the people who'd betrayed them, words they no longer needed to carry. It felt right to leave mine there, too. As I stepped outside, the evening sun was melting behind the horizon, painting the sky in lavender and gold. David joined me, carrying 2 cups of tea. "For closure," he said with a small smile. We stood quietly on the church steps, sipping, watching the sky change. The past no longer hurt. It simply existed, folded neatly among the lessons we'd learned. When we drove home, the headlights caught the lavender rows by my porch. They shimmered like silver threads, alive even after the frost. Maybe that's what truth does. It doesn't erase the pain. It teaches you how to bloom through it. Rehook, final reflection: and if truth could speak, I think it would whisper this. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing peace over the echo of betrayal. Winter came softly that year. The lavender by the porch bent under a thin veil of frost, its purple fading but never gone. I watched it each morning from my rocking chair, a wool shawl wrapped around my shoulders, steam curling from my mug of tea. The world finally felt still enough to listen. David had settled into his new rhythm at the foundation. He handled finances now with the same care I once used to balance church ledgers. Sometimes when he caught me watching him, He'd smile, that quiet, grateful smile that needed no words. The wound between us had healed, leaving a thin silver scar of understanding. One afternoon, he brought over an old wooden box he'd restored. "For your journals," he said. Inside it, my notebooks lay side by side. The grocery lists from years ago, the evidence that once rebuilt our lives, and the pages of people's stories we'd helped since. Each book was a fragment of truth, stitched together by time. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe we should publish them, not as a confession but as a guide for others who feel powerless." I traced the smooth edge of the box and smiled. "Maybe one day," I replied. "But for now, they're our reminder that light only matters because we've known the dark." That evening, a soft knock came at the door. It was Reverend Cole, older now, his coat dusted with snow. "Margaret," he said, handing me a small envelope. A donation came in anonymously, $10,000 for Grace Hands. The sender wrote only 3 words, "For forgiveness' sake." I didn't need to guess who it was. I pressed the envelope to my heart and whispered, "Then she's found her peace too." Later, when the night settled deep and quiet, I stepped outside. The stars hung low, cold and brilliant. The lavender, pale under moonlight, looked almost silver. I bent to touch one brittle stem. It crumbled gently in my hand, releasing a faint scent that carried through the cold air. Fragile, stubborn, alive. I thought of everything the years had taken and returned. Love, betrayal, justice, forgiveness. None of it wasted, all of it transformed. Before going in, I wrote a single line in my newest notebook, the only page filled so far. The truth doesn't end a story. It teaches us how to live the next one honestly. I closed the cover, placed it inside the box, and turned off the lamp. The room glowed with the last trace of candlelight, warm and complete. Rehook, final line, and if tomorrow never came, I'd still rest easy, because even secrets, when faced with truth, learn how to sleep. Spring returned slowly, shy as forgiveness itself. The chill that once haunted my little house had loosened. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny prayers. Outside, the lavender I'd thought dead pushed out new green shoots. Every morning I brewed tea, opened the front door and listened, to wind, to birds, to the steady heartbeat of a life mended rather than perfect. Grace Hand's foundation had grown. What began as 3 desks in a church basement had become a bustling network of volunteers and counselors. David now led most of the meetings, his sleeves rolled up, his voice sure. Sometimes he'd call out across the room, "Mom, can you double-check this report?" And I would smile, remembering when he once doubted my memory. One afternoon, he placed a small frame on my desk, a photo of our first clients, arms around one another, smiling. On the back, he had written, "Because you refused to stay silent." I felt a warmth rise behind my eyes. The boy I had raised had finally become the man his father had hoped he'd be. After work, I often walked to the cemetery where Frank rested beneath the old pecan tree. I would sit on the bench and tell him about our days, the new volunteers, the elderly couples we'd helped, the donations that somehow always arrived right when we needed them. I told him about Clara too, how she had sent another letter, this time enclosing a small check for the foundation and a note that simply read, "To begin again." I didn't know where she lived now, but her words carried no deceit, only humility. Maybe that was enough. As twilight settled, the church bells from St. Mary's drifted over the fields. Their echo reminded me that time doesn't erase pain. It teaches you to walk beside it. My hands, lined and thin, still carried strength, proof that forgiveness, like lavender, survives every frost. That night, I opened a new notebook, the 9th one in my collection, and wrote, "Today the garden bloomed again." David smiled. Clara found peace. The truth kept its promise. Then I set down my pen, leaned back in the old rocking chair, and let the quiet fill the house. Outside, the wind whispered through the lavender, carrying a scent that was both beginning and farewell. I closed my eyes, whispering the same prayer I'd spoken for years. Let those who are lost find their way home. And in that hush before sleep, I realized they already had. Rehook/closing thought. Maybe every ending is just another morning waiting for the courage to open its eyes. The years have moved quietly, almost kindly. The lavender outside my porch now grows wild, spilling past the fence and scenting the road when the wind turns warm. Sometimes neighbors stop to take a few stems. I don't mind. Beauty is meant to be shared, not hoarded. Inside, the house carries new sounds: volunteers' laughter, papers shuffling, David's footsteps whenever he visits to check the foundation's accounts. He still teases me about keeping everything handwritten, but I tell him, ink remembers better than machines. He just smiles and keeps typing. The Grace Hands Foundation now works with other cities. I don't travel much, but letters arrive each week. Stories from people who found strength through our small beginning. They write things like, "You helped me face my son," or "Your courage gave me language for my pain." I keep every letter in the wooden box David once restored. When I open it, the scent of paper and lavender rises together. Proof that even words can heal. One Sunday morning after church, a young woman approached me. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Hayes, my mother told me about you. She said you taught her that truth doesn't end families, it cleanses them." She pressed a tiny bouquet into my hand. I recognized the handwriting on the attached note before I even read it. From Clara. I didn't cry. I simply breathed in the lavender and whispered a silent thank you into the spring air. Perhaps redemption really does travel in circles. That evening I sat by the window, watching dusk turn the sky from gold to violet. The old clock ticked softly, marking time not as loss but as rhythm. I thought of Frank, of the first garden we planted together, of David's laughter as a boy, of the long road from betrayal to forgiveness. Everything that had once felt like an ending was now just another season's turning. Before bed, I opened my final notebook and wrote, "Truth began in pain, but it grew into purpose. What once broke me became my offering to others." I set the pen down, closed the cover, and smiled. Outside, the lavender swayed beneath the moonlight, silver and alive. I could almost hear Frank's voice in the wind. "You kept your promise, Maggie. You made the truth gentle again." I whispered back, "Yes. And it finally learned how to bloom." Rehook/final reflection. Because when all the stories are told and every secret rests, what remains isn't sorrow. It's the quiet grace of having lived truthfully to the very end. The house is quieter now than it has ever been. Even the old clock in the hallway seems to tick more slowly, as if time itself has learned to breathe. Morning light pours through the curtains, gold and forgiving. The scent of lavender drifts in, mingling with the aroma of tea. Some days I imagine the garden keeps my memories better than I do. It has watched every season of my life unfold and settle back into soil. Grace Hands continues to grow without me needing to lead it anymore. Younger hearts have taken the helm. David among them, steady and patient. I only visit once a week now, to greet new volunteers and remind them that every form they fill, and every story they listen to is a kind of prayer. They call me Miss Margaret, as though the years have turned me into something kindly mythic. I laugh, tell them I'm no saint. Just a woman who learned that truth needs tending like any living thing. One afternoon, a small envelope arrived without a name. Inside was a pressed lavender bloom and a single sentence written in neat cursive. "Thank you for teaching me that forgiveness is also a beginning." No signature, no address. I placed it in the wooden box with the others. The petals were dry but still carried their fragrance. Proof that some things endure even after they've been pressed by time. As dusk fell, I stepped outside. The porch boards creaked beneath my slippers. The sky burned soft pink and gray. Across the yard, David's children chased each other through the rows of lavender, their laughter spilling into the air like music. The sight filled me with a warmth that words could not quite hold. The future had found its way back to this small patch of earth. I sat in my rocker, notebook open on my lap, and wrote the only line that came to mind. Everything we forgive becomes part of the fragrance of our lives. When the first stars appeared, I closed the book and let the pen rest. I didn't need more pages. The story had already learned how to speak for itself. In the foundation, in my son, in every stranger who discovered hope through our small act of courage. The wind shifted, brushing against the lavender, carrying their scent toward the road. Somewhere in that whisper, I heard Frank's laughter, Clara's apology, David's promise. All of it blended into one soft note of peace. Final rehook/farewell. And maybe that's all any life should leave behind. Not perfection, not riches, but a fragrance that reminds the world we once loved it honestly. Years have passed since the story everyone thought had ended. Time has softened the edges of everything, the pain, the triumph, even the silence. My name, Margaret Hayes, now hangs on a small bronze plaque outside the Foundation's new office in downtown Dallas. The Grace Hand Center for Elder Justice, founded in memory of a mother who believed truth has no age. I am no longer here to read it. The garden where the first lavender was planted still grows behind my old house, tended now by my grandchildren. They call it Grandma's Field, though the soil has seen far more than their laughter. Each spring the air fills with that same perfume that once drifted through my kitchen window, the one that used to announce another season of endurance. David runs the foundation full-time. He no longer introduces himself as the son of a victim but as the child of a survivor. In his office sits my wooden box of notebooks, every page preserved, every date in trembling line of truth bound in gentle leather. He says that whenever he forgets why the work matters, he opens one at random and reads until the numbers start to sound like heartbeats again. Clara never returned to Texas, but once a year a donation arrives under a quiet alias. No letters now, no words. Just an amount large enough to keep another senior safe for another month. I think forgiveness can sometimes bloom in silence. Perhaps this is hers. On warm evenings, the staff gather outside the center's porch to drink coffee. The youngest among them often ask how it all began. David tells them about a small house, a garden of lavender, and a woman who refused to believe that age meant weakness. They listen wide-eyed, until the sun sinks behind the glass towers and the air smells faintly of hope. And if, by some grace, the wind carries their laughter far enough, maybe it brushes across that old garden miles away, past the porch swing, past the notebooks resting in their box, stirring the lavender so it releases one more breath of sweetness into the world. Because stories don't truly end. They take root in the lives that follow. Mine began in betrayal and ended in bloom. Everything between was just the growing season. Final reflection/rehook. If someday you pass a field of lavender and catch its scent lingering longer than it should, maybe that's not memory at all. Maybe it's truth reminding you that love, once honest, never really dies. The seasons kept turning long after my name faded from the headlines, long after the house grew quiet again. Yet somehow the lavender never stopped blooming. Every spring, David and his children still come to tend the garden. The soil remembers, it always does. He kneels where I once stood, trimming the stems carefully, teaching his little ones how to be gentle with living things. They laugh, and the sound rolls through the yard like music I can almost still hear. Sometimes, when the wind moves just right, it carries their voices to the porch where my old rocking chair still creaks softly. In that motion, in that rhythm, something eternal breathes, proof that love doesn't end. It changes its shape. David often tells visitors, everything started here, with truth, lavender, and a mother who refused to be quiet. They smile politely, not knowing that this place once held both betrayal and forgiveness in the same air. But that's how life is. Pain and peace learning to live side by side. Inside the house, the wooden box of notebooks still sits beneath the window, where sunlight touches it every morning. The ink may have faded, but the words remain. Testament to a woman who wrote her way out of sorrow and into grace. The foundation continues its work, led by the people who once came seeking help. Some call it justice. Others call it faith. I think it's simply love made practical. One quiet evening when the sky burns soft with gold, David lights a single candle on the porch. He does it every year on the same day, the day everything changed. The flame flickers gently, never fighting the wind, only dancing with it. That's how he remembers me, he once said. Not as someone unbreakable, but as someone who learned how to bend without losing herself. If souls can watch, I like to think I'm there in the glow, beside him, beside the lavender, beside every truth that once hurt but now heals. The garden hums softly, the air smells sweet, and the world feels forgiven. I am home. Final reflection. Because when love is honest and forgiveness real, even after we're gone, something of us stays. In the laughter of our children, the kindness we teach, and the lavender that keeps on blooming.